Hero equipment. There are currently 32 of them in Clash of Clans, and although most of the time they work as intended, sometimes they don't. Today, I gathered the top 10 craziest equipment bugs ever. We're gonna start with some pretty harmless bugs and then move our way up to some pretty gnarly ones. Do keep in mind though, some of these happened at the exact same time as others. I will talk about some equipment more than once, but I'm just gonna be separating the bugs for ranking purposes. Some of these were on a whole other level, so I didn't want to combine them.
Let's do this.
The giant arrow and its not so entire village range. When the giant arrow was added, the description stated that it would cross the entire village. However, depending on where you deployed your queen, that wasn't the case. What kind of false advertising? If you happen to arrow from one corner to the other, the arrows wouldn't go far enough to hit some buildings on the other end. Understandably, players were calling to either fix the new equipment or at least change the description to accurately describe the giant arrow's capabilities. It's not the entire village, you know, but let's be real, it's not like it was the end of the world or anything. You just lost out on a little bit of value, and if you made sure to place your queen closer, you wouldn't have this issue anyway. Just over 2 months later, in February 2024, they made some changes ensuring that the giant arrow had more than enough travel distance to hit everything in its path. It's unknown if this was a bug or just a simple oversight, but I thought it was a perfect start to this video. Alright, now we have the magic mirror, which actually holds the record for the most bugs an equipment had during its launch. That's not a good record to have. The giant arrow came close. I actually have a couple of these to mention, but we're just mentioning the most harmless ones first. This one didn't even impact your battles. Instead, it was a bug that happened after. As you know, the magic mirror spawns clones of the queen, and of course, they also lose HP as they go about doing what queens do. You know, when you're attacking walls, you're bound to take a lot of damage. But players noticed something a bit odd. When the battle ended and you went back home, your queen's regeneration time was suspiciously high, or she had lost a lot of her second life. But the weirdest part is that this was the case even if the queen herself hadn't taken any damage whatsoever. Clearly, something was up. It turns out that the clones were contributing to her regeneration time. If they got damaged, it would add to this timer. And if they went down completely, your queen would need to recover all her HP regardless if she took any damage. This caused a bit of unbalance with your heroes, where the queen was almost always recovering after a battle. Just like women in real life, she was never ready. No, I'm just kidding. I hope my wife's not watching this one. This was an ongoing issue for about a month from her launch on August 9th, 2024 to September, where it was fixed. Next up is the Royal Champion's Haste Vial. During the equipment's launch in March 2024, players noticed that their Royal Champion was dealing less damage, but only when activating her ability. For example, in this one clip, the Royal Champion needed to hit this ricochet cannon 7 times before it went down. But when her ability was activated, which included the Haste Vial, she hit the other ricochet cannon 8 times before it went down. Albeit faster, yes, but requiring more hits at the end of the day. Obviously, that wasn't supposed to happen. Something was causing her to deal less damage. And because the Haste Vial had just dropped like a couple days before, all eyes were on it. And it was the Haste Vial. The Haste gives extra DPS as part of its passive abilities, but activating it would simply toggle that passive ability off until the entire ability was over. That's why it took her more hits to destroy things. And that's the simple answer. Here's a more complicated one. However, at the time, the Haste Vial was absolutely crushing it. Even with this bug, it was considered very strong, and there were concerns that fixing it would make it overpowered. So it wasn't immediately fixed. It was only until 3 weeks later where they came up with a nerf that reduced its passive ability whilst fixing the bug. Developers explained that this wasn't really a nerf overall because the Royal Champion would end up doing more damage after the changes because it would no longer be affected by the bug. The decrease in numbers was simply to balance it out. Moving on, we have the Eternal Tome, which somehow broke a feature that has nothing to do with equipment, but I don't know. So this bug first appeared in December 2023 during the launch of equipment. Players noticed that if they were using the Eternal Tome and the Warden went down, he wouldn't automatically activate his ability even if they had that setting turned on in the settings. However, at the time, it was considered pretty rare, so the fact that it took 3 months to fix wasn't that big of a deal. It affected maybe a couple people here and there. Someone could have possibly broke their iPad over it, but whatever. But fast forward to June 2025, after the Eternal Tome rework, something seemed to make the bug return. Players who had the Eternal Tome equipped, and only the Eternal Tome, would experience the Warden suddenly going down and not activating anything, despite their settings. Based on videos and comments, this seems to mostly occur when the Warden goes down from an air mine, but it wasn't limited to that. There is footage of it happening with Clan Council troops and defending heroes. The crazy part is that as I'm recording this video, this bug still seems to be affecting players using Eternal Tome. They're probably gonna fix it soon, but the real question is, why does this keep happening to the Eternal Tome? Why that equipment, you know? Next up we have the Giant Arrow once again, this time a bug that essentially wasted the entire ability. A lot of strategies start with the Giant Arrow in one corner of the base, right? Or whatever side is gonna give you the most value. And you often activate the Giant Arrow soon after deployment so you don't waste time or potentially have the queen veer off to somewhere else where it's not going to line up properly. Some of you already know where I'm going with this, but the Giant Arrow had this one bug where if you did it too fast, it would just go out of the map. Like, it would go the completely wrong direction. It made no sense. It didn't even go anywhere in the base, which is the worst part. You got zero value. As you can imagine, this was pretty devastating, especially in competitive play. It was happening all the time. There was a bit of debate on why this was happening. You activated the ability before the queen turned around. The arrow didn't have enough time to log on, or because skill issue. But at the end of the day, this was a bug. It wasn't anyone's fault. Doing it too fast, it shouldn't have caused this. For a while, the only fix was to slow down until it was eventually fixed 2 months after its launch. Moving on, we have the Fireball, and this one's pretty recent, fresh off the press. In February 2025, not during its launch, but right after some balance changes, the Fireball had some issues targeting both air and ground. Now, this was actually an issue all the way back in March 2024 during its launch, and some believed it was an intended mechanic or just the weird way it worked. But no, it was fixed about a month in. It was a bug. This time, nearly a year later, it seemed to resurface. It was most obvious when throwing a fireball at an area that had a minion prince. Everything around the prince would get annihilated, but he'd still be there unharmed. There were beliefs that this was a secret nerf that they just didn't tell us about. However, shortly after, it was fixed again, but it resurfaced yet again in June 2025. Now, as of when I'm making this video, I did try this and it seems to be working normally. The fireball properly damaged air and ground troops, including the minion prince. So it looks like it was fixed, but it's unknown what keeps causing this to happen. It's pretty annoying for fireball users, and hopefully it's patched for good. Alright, now we have the magic mirror once again, and this time I'll be compiling everything else this equipment launched with. I didn't want to mention them all separately. It was a combination of all of these annoying bugs that made it so bad. Starting off with one of its abilities, health recovery. The magic mirror is supposed to heal the queen when activated, but this did not happen at all. The queen would only heal whatever she was getting from another equipment, so oftentimes the clones would outlive the queen herself. Then there was the fact that when using the mirror, she had an issue outputting the correct amount of damage when paired with the frozen arrow. Similar to that one world champion haste bug, the queen was dealing less damage when activated. It was canceling out the frozen arrow's passive DPS increase. On top of that, her interaction with the warden was bugged. Under the Eternal Tome, her clones weren't affected by it when they were supposed to. And finally, the cherry on top, for whatever reason, buildings the clones destroyed didn't count for stuff like clan games. It was a whole mess. I counted 5 bugs, including the one we mentioned earlier. That is impressive for all the wrong reasons. Next up is the Heroic Torch, the newest one in the video. Added in August 2025, it launched with a pretty annoying bug that actually affected more than the Warden. So during a battle, if you happen to activate the Heroic Torch and it runs its course, troops are walking through walls and everything's good. If then the Warden was about to go through a wall or in the process of doing so, and the ability ended, he would get stuck. For the rest of the entire battle, he'd just sit there and do absolutely nothing. But if losing your main support hero to a wall wasn't bad enough, it could happen to any hero. Once again, if they were about to go through a wall or in the process of doing so. But not only that, it could also happen if they exited the aura and were about to go through a wall. Clearly, heroes had some issues recovering from no longer being in the aura of the Heroic Torch, including the Warden himself, which is absolutely hilarious. I think the funniest part though is that even a hero like the World Champion, which can jump over walls, will get stuck right before going through a wall. Didn't even have to be inside the wall. Because this one is so recent, it's still ongoing, it's not fixed, but there's a chance if you're watching this in the future, it's already patched. Now down to the second to last is the giant arrow again, but this bug was like none other. In December 2023, footage like this started to show up on Reddit, the arrow appearing to one-shot defenses like the Eagle artillery. Now for those who don't use the arrow, this is certainly not normal. Unless it was already damaged, it would never one-shot the Eagle like that. In fact, the arrow isn't capable of one-shotting a lot of things, so this was alarming to say the least. At the time, there were speculations that this was because it was affected by the rage spell, but the culprit turned out to be the invisibility vial. It's a little complicated, but this Reddit comment explains it really well. To summarize it, basically the queen's normal shot was acting like a second giant arrow. You can see this in this footage. The regular arrows are flying with the giant arrow. Actually, it's in front of it. This was all somehow caused by the invisibility vial. Like I always say, how does that happen? The patch notes also confirmed this. So toward the end of February 2024, about 2.5 months later, it said they fixed a bug related to the giant arrow where it would activate twice and deal much more damage than intended. It's gotta be one of the wildest equipment bugs to this day. Again, I'm always curious on how things like this happen. It's fascinating to me. I don't know about anybody else. Before we get into the most insane equipment bug ever, I did have some honorable mentions, bugs that weren't that severe or didn't fit in the video, but I still wanted to mention them. Like the snake bracelet and its invisible snakes, only in single player maps though, for some odd reason. Then a visual glitch with the rocket spear that caused it to fire with the giant arrow. It didn't actually do anything though, it was all visual. And finally, not specific to one equipment, but that one bug during the initial equipment launch that let you upgrade equipment you didn't have by going to the chief journey and going to their info screen. It was pretty harmless, kind of like pre-ordering your upgrades, but it was eventually fixed. And finally, my pick for the wildest equipment bug goes to the giant gauntlet. I'm sure many of you are familiar, it's one of the most infamous bugs ever, but essentially this bug caused the king to be invincible. If a king was near a warden with the eternal tome activated, then you activated the giant gauntlet, it would make him invincible for the remainder of the entire giant gauntlet ability. It didn't even have to be when the warden activated the eternal tome, it could have been way later in the battle, and the king would have this little own eternal tome, basically. Obviously, one of the strongest heroes in the game, unable to take damage for a really long time, was pretty busted. It also didn't help that this was easy to replicate, so players were accidentally facing this issue during battles and accidentally getting 3 stars, if you know what I mean. Now, developers did catch this bug early on. However, much like a lot of bugs in this video, it wouldn't be fixed until the end of February 2024. That was the next main update, so that's when they fixed a lot of these. It seems like it wasn't possible with the maintenance break. So for nearly 3 months, there were a bunch of invincible kings running around, absolutely destroying bases, as if equipment at the time wasn't strong enough. But yeah, that is my list of the top 10 equipment bugs. I really wanted to make this sooner, but fortunately, equipment bugs are not an everyday thing, so I just had to wait for enough of them to make a decent enough list. As always, I hope you all enjoyed today's video, and hey, before you go, use the things to like this next video, so why don't you check it out? So, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace!